everyone. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Molly.
How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. You're sideways to me.
I'm sideways here.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay. There we go. All right. So, my first question for you is, The Lightness of Hands is your second novel. Your first novel, Symptoms of Being Human, is a wonderful story about a gender fluid person, something you don't have personal experience with. How was the process of writing something you have more personal experience with versus a book and what was it like researching these two books?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say hi, everybody. Hi, Upland teens. Hi, Upland Library followers. And hey to my followers who joined us. If you don't know me, I'm Jeff Carvin. I'm the author of Symptoms of Being Human. And my new book, I'm so glad you asked, The Lightness of Hands, just came out last week. And I'm super excited about it. Like Molly just said, my first book was about a gender fluid teenager. This book is about Ellie Dante, who has to battle her bipolar 2 disorder in order to resurrect her sick father's failed magic career. But you asked me about how different it was to write a story that came from my personal experience rather than a character who's gender fluid, which I don't have personal experience with. I'm going to be totally honest.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't that different. I find that the thing about fiction is that you have to find what's universally human. And in my opinion, those of us, who are cis and those of us who are not cis, most of our life experience is the same. And for Riley, Riley's main problem is trying to fit in and reckon with themselves. And that's something I relate deeply to. So for me, the research was really fun, actually. When I was in high school, if you wanted to research something, you had to go to the library like Hermione Granger and dig and, try to call people and do interviews. But now, hundreds of primary sources, teens who are dealing with this stuff. So I watched and I listened and I asked questions. And I do have gender fluid people in my life. So I called them and asked them. And then, when the draft was written, I asked them to read it. I ran it by them. I got them to go, nah, this part doesn't ring. And yeah, that part does. And then I have a brilliant editor at Balzer and Bray. And, they got a couple of sensitivity readers to read it. And for the most part, I kind of passed the test. So again, I think it's about imagination and empathy more than it's about research.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what you hit on there is that we all have that kind of universal human experience is something that really draws me to your books. I feel like when I was reading Symptoms of Human, even though I'm cis, I feel like I could relate to Riley. So I think that's something really important you hit on there.
Yeah, and writing The Lightness of Hands, it was a personal reckoning for me. I was diagnosed about 2 weeks into writing it. I was just actually going back through all my drafts and looking at the dates and sort of like doing forensic research. I had just had a really serious mental health crisis, and I started writing it as I was trying to find the right doctor. And I got diagnosed about 2 weeks into it, and I had misdiagnosed my main character. So I had been misdiagnosed, so Ellie got to get the right diagnosis simultaneously with me. So it became a reckoning. The kind of research I had to do was like, what kind of health insurance plans were available for people of low income, and then things like what towns would they have to stop in based on the gas mileage they could get in their RV, and what the price of gas was, and just sort of logistical stuff like that.
So very interesting.
Yeah.
What made you decide to combine the themes of magic and mental illness, which are two very big elements in The Lightness of Hands?
Okay, well, I always disappoint people when I answer these kinds of questions because I don't do a lot of thinking when I write first drafts. I sort of just like go with a gut feeling. And for this book, I had known I wanted to write about magic for a while. You know, when you're first trying to get published and you write your bio, you try to make your bio sound as interesting as possible because you're totally unpublished and you're like, how do I make myself sound important? And so I think my bio at the time started with the line, I grew up the son of a banker and a magician, because my dad is a magician. He was a member of the Magic Castle in Hollywood for years and years. So I grew up around magic like Ellie did. And then I got to perform with him a little bit when I was a teenager. So magic was in my blood and it was in my heart. And then I had been pitching to an agent. I had written the third manuscript I wrote, which is the one I wrote before Symptoms. It was a dystopian fantasy. And I arrived very late to the dystopian tea party. I think the second Hunger Games movie was about to come out, and dystopian was as over as vampires and werewolves at the time. So I had pitched a book to this agent, and she said, I can't sell your book, but I like you. Write something about magic because that's in your bio. So that was in the back of my head. And then after Symptoms, I wrote two full-length manuscripts that kind of died on the vine after 35 months and 7 drafts. So I was dipping back into what I knew best, and magic was on the list.
Interesting. So, as someone who was raised with magic in your life from a young age, do you have a favorite magic trick?
I do. It's one of the first magic tricks you learn as a magician, and it's called cups and balls. And you have 3 cups and 1 ball. And the idea is that the ball appears to move from cup to cup before your eyes without you seeing what happens. And at the end of the trick, there's always some kind of surprise. For example, if it's a little red ball that you're passing between, all of a sudden he'll lift up the cup and there's a tennis ball. Or I've seen guys do it where he lifts up the cup and it's, a live animal. And I love close-up magic. It's what Ellie is best at in the book because it happens at this distance. You just can't imagine that it's fake. It happens right before your eyes. Big stage illusions are interesting, but as a person who grew up with magic, there's only so many mechanics for tricks like that. But with close-up, it's all skill. Those magicians practice for hours and hours and hours to get the moves down, to get the misdirection right so that you just don't see what happened. And I know how the trick is done, and I'm watching for it, and I still can't see it when a good magician does it. And that's such a pleasure.
I bet, do you ever feel like, as someone who was, raised with magic, knows how a lot of tricks done, does it lose some of, like, the magic for you after a while, or do you still get that same, like, rush every time?
So when I was 10, I was begging my dad to teach me magic, and he took me aside, and he said, listen, I'll teach you a trick, but you have to, A, promise that you'll never tell, because that's the magician's code, and B,
sure.
You have to know you're going to be disappointed when you find out how it's done, because it's not fascinating. It's just, oh, duh. So I remember doing it and thinking, wow, he's right. For a moment, I was disappointed, and then I launched right into the feeling of creating that magic for someone else was just as much of a high, if not more, than being mystified by the illusion yourself. So I think that was maybe one of the formative experiences for me becoming an artist, is that I really wanted to create the experience of reading a good book or watching a good movie or seeing a well-executed illusion. I wanted to create that for other people.
Great. And speaking of the magician's code, when Ellie does the tricks in the story, you play with perspective a little bit. And the book is primarily told from Ellie's point of view, but when Ellie's doing tricks, you switch to the audience's perspective. And that, I thought, was a very clever way to kind of conceal how the big trick is done. What gave you that idea, and what was that like to write?
Thank you. I'm really glad. First of all, panic is what is what inspired it, because I didn't think about that until I got to the first magic performance, and I thought, oh my god, this whole book is stupid. Like I can't write this without giving away tricks, and I just couldn't do that. And so I thought, well, maybe I can write this book from the third person. But the reason I've experimented with the third person, but you know, when you're a writer, there are some things that you're better at than other things. You know, there are tools in your toolbox that you really have a grip on, and you want to grab onto that tool and just, you know, you want to pull that lever as hard as you can, as often as you can. And for me, that tool is narrative voice. And so writing in the third person would be such a stumbling block. So I wrote the first magic scene in the third person. And then it occurred to me, you know, one of the things that happens to me when I'm either really depressed or really hypomanic is I kind of disassociate, and I experience my feelings as though I'm watching myself. And I just thought, that's what I need to do. I need to create that. And then also my desire to create the illusion for someone else. I thought it might be fascinating for Ellie to be really focused on how it looks from the audience's perspective. So panic created it. And when I sent that first draft to my editor, I was terrified that she was going to go, oh, this is really good, except the switch to third person doesn't work, and you have to show us how the magic is done. Because in the past, I had wrote, you know, treatments and pages and submitted them. And on this book, I said, I'm writing the whole book before you see it, because I just needed that privacy. But I was also scared that, you know, there were big things about it that wouldn't work. But it ended up working out.
Good. All right. So the Nine of Hearts plays a very special role in the story. Is there a reason that you chose that card in particular?
I had originally, so what you never want to do as a magician is choose the Ace of Spades or the Queen of Hearts, because those cards feel planned. They don't feel random, even if you were to accidentally draw them randomly. So I think I had originally chosen the Two of Clubs because it just seemed like the least sexy card in the deck.
Most unexpected.
Right. And then I thought, no, it's got to be a 7, but that felt cliche. And I wanted a heart because my books are all about heart. So I wanted a heart, and then I don't know why the 9. So part of it was random because I wanted it to feel random. That
makes sense. And I agree. I think your books are very full of heart.
Thank you.
What would you consider Ellie's biggest strengths as a character?
Ellie's biggest strength as a character, she's really self-aware. I think more than most people and more than most teenagers, she's really self-aware. And to be honest, you know, Riley was too. And part of that for me is I want to dig into the mechanics of mental illness. I wanted it to be an experience where the person could feel it, but also get a sense of how it worked. And so part of that was a choice. And part of it's just, I'm a very self-aware person, from a vanity point of view and from a reflective point of view. You know, I meditate. I'm constantly trying to be aware of the impact I'm having on others. So I think part of that's just, you know, me leaning on my own personality to write the main character.
When you set out to write Lightness, did you set out to tell a story about mental illness, or was that something that kind of came along as it happened?
No, I wanted to write, you know, Symptoms was really heavy. The 2 manuscripts I wrote after that were even heavier, and I needed a break, man. I was looking for adventure story, road trip. You know, I've toured the country twice as a musician in my band 7K. And so there was something about life on the road that I wanted to capture. It's exhilarating. And, but I had just finished a dark period in my life. And at the end of chapter 1, I realized Ellie's not in a good place. And I was actually really disappointed because I knew I couldn't authentically write this adventure story. You know, I don't know why I returned to heavy themes of identity. maybe I'm healing something that I haven't quite fixed from my own teenage experience. That's something I haven't figured out. And quite honestly, it kind of doesn't matter because I'm going to write what I write. Like I said, I don't do a lot of thinking during that first draft. If I get an instinct, I'm like, oh, got an instinct. Let me pursue that as far as I can. And thinking, was it Top Gun? It's some movie with guys who fly jet planes. And the line was, if you think you're dead. And that's kind of how I feel about writing novels. If you start thinking, it becomes an intellectual process. And but like, that's a textbook. And we all slog through those to learn things. But when you sit down with a novel, man, you want it to grab you and take you for a ride. And that's what I wanted to do, you know?
You said you kind of just go with a feeling. Do you do a lot of plotting or not so much?
I wish I was a plotter, but I'm kind of a pantser.
Nice.
As I get into my career more, I'm discovering that it's helpful to have a sense of where it's going, a goal to get to. But for me, writing is about discovery. And so sometimes I can experience discovery as I'm outlining, but for the most part, I have to get into prose and narrative voice so that I'm interested enough to discover the plot. Because just sitting down and going, what happens next? Man, that's not a very rewarding experience. I have to do a lot of things to make myself feel like a writer. And I don't think, especially new writers, don't do that enough. They get focused on, I have to get pages or I have to get it right. And to me, it's like, if I finish the day and I feel like I was a writer that day, that'll bring me back to the chair. That'll give me the strength to, stare down the barrel of a blank page the next morning.
I really like that. That's very interesting.
Nice.
So in a second, we're going to open it up to audience questions. So everyone that's watching, get your questions ready. But before that, what advice would you give to bipolar creatives like Ellie?
There's a myth out there that like not being on medication is somehow advantageous to your creative process. And that's super dangerous. There are trade-offs. There are always trade-offs. When I launched my book last week, I was full-blown hypomania. I had some of the greatest writing breakthroughs that week. But there's a price, and I am on meds and I am meditating and exercising and taking vitamins and eating right and doing all of that stuff. So I'm taking care of myself. I still get the juice, but without the massive crash. So I guess my advice would be really take care of yourself and don't buy into the myth that you have to suffer for art. That's bull.
Great advice. Thank you. Do we have any audience questions?
My dad, I think, is watching, by the way. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Mr. Garvin. Any audience questions?
Yeah, I like really embarrassing questions that people don't want to ask. And you guys have usernames, so it's not like I know who you are.
Yeah, you got total anonymity. Just go for it.
If you don't ask questions, I'm going to start playing with cat filters and stuff. Okay, that's just creepy. Well, oh, here we go.
I see a question. Hi, Jeff. Your first two novels have dealt with difficult social subjects, gender identity, and mental health. Are you looking to target another social issue for book 3?
I wasn't looking, but I found one. So here we go. I'm about 20,000 words in, and I'm cranking away. I've learned not to talk about my projects. It never adds anything to it. It just creates expectation and confusion, By the way, guys, there's a little icon at the bottom of your screen with a question mark on it. That's an easier way than putting it in the comments, because then it just scrolls past us and we can't see it. Yeah, so the next book, it's kind of heavier than I want it to be.
Okay. Where did you go on tour when you were a musician, and did you use any of the places in the book? That's a
Yes,
good question.
absolutely. Everything that happens in the RV is personal experience. I mean, I toured from Los Angeles to Hartford, Connecticut, and back, and mostly playing colleges. But it's the nights between when you don't have a show that are the hardest. And we were driving an old beat up RV, and we weren't mechanics, and water would get in the fuel, and just all these nightmare. It's I like to say an RV. It's like living in a house that's undergoing a 5.0 earthquake constantly. Things fall and break and fall apart, and it's a nightmare. So yeah, the places we did play in Mishawaka. Some of my most memorable shows were in Mishawaka, Indiana, at this bar. And then Sonny's Roadhouse is based on a real roadhouse in Oklahoma. That was such a trip. It's such a trip, man, to play, to be from Southern California and play in a culture that's so politically and socially different. And people just love rock and roll, man. They just want to have a good time and forget about their job. I think one of the things that's sad about our political environment is that we're all 80% to 90% alike, and we're letting the other 10 to 20% divide us. I wish everyone could go on tour with a rock band because, man, people just want to have a beer and listen to loud music.
But bring everyone together.
Yeah, exactly.
What kinds of characters are you drawn to reading/writing? Are there any character flaws that you find fascinating?
What kind of characters? I think I'm drawn to characters who are misfits, fishes out of water. That's how I felt in high school. Character flaws, yeah. So I think the thing that I discovered about my high school self was that I was arrogant in sort of a weird way. Like I felt like a misfit, and I sort of assumed that other people didn't. Like I felt like a special person. And after going to college and experiencing life, most people feel that way in high school. And so I like one of the things I love about Riley is Solo just beats them up for thinking they're a unicorn. So I like that. I like when characters get a reality check. I think the thing that I like about Ellie, and I got to express it, people think of mania and hypomania as like super high, happy, fun, productive time, but it can manifest as irritability and anger and dangerous behavior. And Ellie engages in some of that. And, the hard part is when that wears off, you're left with, oh my God, what have I done? I just, abused that person emotionally or, whatever. And when people see that, they don't react like that person's mentally ill. You just look like a jerk. And I think a huge part of the misunderstanding of mental illness is that it affects your behavior and your personality in a way you can't control. And people they don't want to see that. They just want to, they see like, wow, you were a jerk. When you see a homeless person on the street babbling to themselves, you can go, oh, that person is schizophrenic and I feel empathy for them. But when someone's just a jerk, it's hard to connect those things. And that's been really hard for me to deal with and to accept in myself that some of my behavior isn't, it's not personality flaws. It's, some wiring.
Interesting. Here. Who's your favorite character that you've written?
I mean, my heart is with Riley and Ellie, but aside from Riley and Ellie, man, I love Solo. I want to hang out with Solo. And I feel the same way about Ripley. I love characters. I love the best friends. I even like Sierra and Jim Vickers in Symptoms because their lives are complicated too.
Yeah.
And even though they're the bullies, they have their own problems. That was a purging for me to sort of try to put myself in the shoes of the people I felt persecuted by in high school.
Interesting. What advice would you give to young aspiring writers?
Finish stuff. the number one muscle that you have to build is finishing stuff. I always say you have a creative voice and a critical voice, and they can't work at the same time. So your job is to finish stuff and then edit it. So many times I get questions, how do you get published? And I say, well, have you finished a manuscript? And they go, no. And I'm like, until you can finish a manuscript. And there's two reasons. One is finishing a manuscript may be a miserable experience for you. And you may realize, maybe I don't want to do this, you know? And you have to give yourself the permission to let the identity writer go to figure out if you really want to write. And then the second reason is, man, when you finish your first manuscript, your first novel manuscript, that's an addictive experience. It's like you just wrote a book. I don't know what percentage of human beings have written a book, but it's very narrow. And so just doing that. So the first manuscript I ever wrote was NaNoWriMo, which, if you guys don't know what NaNoWriMo is, every November the 1st, thousands of people all over the world sit down and they write 1,667 words a day for 30 days. And then they wake up on December the 1st as a person who's written a 50,000 word novel. That changed my life, man. I wanted more of that. Recommend it highly. NaNoWriMo.org.
Yes. I'm a huge fan of NaNoWriMo. I've been doing it since 2016. I love it. Yeah. Wow. All right. Which books or authors have influenced your writing the most?
Well, first of all, you have to know that I'm a giant cliche. The book that sort of hit me over the head was The Catcher in the Rye. And for me, it was the narrative voice. I mean, this is a book where nothing happens and the character isn't terribly active. But man, Holden Caulfield just ripped my heart out. What other books? I mean, it's all stuff I read in high school. I read a lot of fantasy, like epic fantasy in high school. I tried to write an epic fantasy and it sucked. I'm a Harry Potter nerd. I mean, I don't know if you can see, but like, where are they? There's my trunk with my wand and all my stuff in it. And then, is it behind me? Right behind me. My wife got me this beautiful hardbound set for Christmas. So that her books fascinate me because the world building is so strong. The characters are strong. They're all mysteries. And I love the tension of a mystery. So Jake, and then Stephen King. My goal is to read everything he's ever written. He's written some of the best stories I've ever read. You know, The Body, upon which Stand By Me was based, Shawshank Redemption. I love Bag of Bones. I mean, he's so creative and free in the way he writes. It's inspiring to me. Oh, and I like Michael Connelly too. He writes the Bosch Cop series, and I love that kind of mystery.
I have a very important question for you. What is your Hogwarts house?
I'm a Gryffindor.
Nice. One of my favorite moments in Lightness of Hands was when Ripley was like, I'm an enabler. It's like being a Hufflepuff. I thought that was hilarious.
I got blowback from that from my friend Joseph Wilbur. He was not happy that I dissed Hufflepuffs. And I had to tell him, like, Hufflepuffs make the world go round. You know?
Definitely. As a Hufflepuff, I agree. But I thought the moment was funny. All right.
Oh, someone's asking what's my favorite cliche.
What's your favorite cliche?
Troubled teen discovers themselves and comes of age, and we all learn something.
Yeah.
It's like a South Park episode. I love that. I'll write that till I die.
I know you have a tattoo for Symptoms of Being Human. Have you gotten one for Lightness of Hands?
I want to, but this horrible virus came along and totally ruined my tattoo plans. I wonder if I have them. I had playing cards made as book plates. So if you ordered,
so cool. They're so cool.
If you ordered from Once Upon a Time, I made these book plates where I signed this side and then 9 of Hearts is on the back. And my artist, the guys at Agency 689, drew this amazing Ellie. So I think I might get some kind of 9 of Hearts something. And this is my Riley tattoo. Riley's haircut there.
Nice. Do you plan to revisit old manuscripts that you have written but not published?
If I run out of fresh ideas, I might, but it's always hard. I always feel like it's harder to go back and fix than it is to forge ahead. That dystopian fantasy that I wrote, I've got a place in my heart for that. I've got kind of a trilogy planned out, and that's the only time I felt like I had a series. So at some point, I might explore that, but it would be like skeleton with new bones. And I really loved the idea of building a world. So maybe someday that one.
That would be neat.
I mean, theoretically, like a worldwide plague is dystopian. So we're living in a dystopia, which makes me a fantasy author.
Definitely. I think that counts. All right. What style of music did your band play? Is there another genre of music that you'd like to try to perform?
Sure. So my band was, I like to say we were like Third Eye Blind meets Maroon 5. So pop rock with a little bit, like with a good rhythm section. Maybe a little Police in there. I would love, so I was the bass player singer. I love playing bass. I would love to play in like a slightly funkier band, like maybe a little bit of Red Hot Chili Peppers or a little bit of like Rufus, something with kind of funk. And I'd also love to play in another power trio. Yeah, there you go.
Nice. If you could only perform music or only write for the rest of your life, but not both, what would you choose?
I think I would choose writing. You know, there's things you want to do, and then there's what people want you to do, you know? And I spent 40 years trying to figure that out, and writing was what people received the best. And I have a desire to reach an audience. That's one of the things that motivates me. So I spent a lot of time, 10 years, trying to have a music career. And I love it and I don't regret it. But the other thing about writing is I don't need anyone's permission. I don't have to go set up any gear. I don't have to drive to another state. It's a much less expensive career from a writing from a financial and a time perspective. And, I have a family now. I have a wife and 2 children. So touring is, that would be a huge lifestyle change for my family. And that's sort of not in the cards.
Not in the cards right now. Okay. What would you like to say to upcoming writers who are struggling to finish a book?
Let it suck. It doesn't suck as bad as you think it does. And there's an old Hollywood saying, you have 12 bad screenplays in you, and you have to write them all before you get to the good one. So, everybody wants to write the great American novel. You have to write some bad books. My first NaNoWriMo was like, I don't even know what the hell it was. It was not even a genre that would you'd find a shelf space for. And then my second one was a, bloated epic fantasy. It was terrible. It was like 70% bad, 30% good. But I was like, oh, it's 30% good. I just write a long thing and cut the parts that are bad. So I had to write, I wrote short stories and I wrote a lot of novels to get good at writing novels. So I would just say, finish it, man. Just get through it. Even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, even if it's super clunky, just finish it. And then you can you can print it out, write, stick it in a drawer and go, I wrote a book. Next.
Nice. Who's your favorite magician? Think about your answer.
I don't have to think about my answer. It's Johnny Ace Palmer, possibly the greatest close-up magician in the world. Every time I see him, he blows my mind. He actually makes me angry because I feel like he's so good, and I can't like I have no idea how he does what he does. It just mystifies me. Other than that, you know, I saw David Copperfield perform when I was, I don't know, 14 or 15. And the thing that I loved about him is he's a storyteller. So his illusions always come from a place of, you know, telling a story. And man, when he did his flying thing, which I sort of reference in the book, man, that blew my mind, captured my imagination, you know.
Definitely. Do you have any writing rituals? And if so, what are they?
You know, I used to. I guess the things that I do to prepare myself for a day of writing, I wake up and while everyone's still asleep, I do morning pages. Google Julia Cameron morning pages. It's part of the artist's way, but it's essentially I write by hand 3 pages of whatever comes to my mind. And for me, it's about, you know, for a long time, I would go through a day and go, gosh, I didn't get to say everything I wanted to say. I didn't get to write everything I wanted to write. I didn't get to think everything I wanted to think. And writing 3 pages in the morning, man, you find out you really don't have that much to say or think or write. You know, it kind of, okay, I said, there it was. I took the 20 minutes, and it kind of dispels that feeling. And then I do meditate for 10 minutes in the morning. I use an app called Waking Up by Sam Harris. It's fantastic. But once that's done, I just try to get behind the chair and do whatever works. It takes me a while to get into the groove and find out, but every day is kind of like starting from scratch in a way. You just find your way in. You hack your way into the jungle with the tools you have.
Do you feel like the act of handwriting is different than typing? And is there a method you prefer?
Yes, it is different. I don't really know why or how. My wife got me a fountain pen for Christmas. Actually,
nice.
I'll show you. It's a Yoda fountain pen.
Cool.
And it's really cool. So, and I'm addicted to Moleskine notebooks, which I couldn't afford for many years. I wrote in a spiral notebook or a legal pad. But the scratch of the pen and the flow of the ink definitely is inspiring. And then sometimes I'll write at Disneyland, again, before the time of the sickness. And I'll take a legal pad and a roller ball and just sit. And I've written many chapters of my last few books that way. And I've done a lot of sort of brainstorming. It's freeing, you know, sitting behind a keyboard. It sometimes feels like you're at a factory. So yeah, writing by hand is fun. I think faster than I write by hand, and I can type almost at the speed of my thoughts. So when I really want to be efficient, I get behind the keyboard. But sometimes paper is freeing.
Right. Well, I think that's all of our questions. So thank you so much, Jeff. It's been great. Everyone, go out and read The Lightness of Hands. It's fantastic. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Molly. Yeah, if you go to my website, jeffgarvinbooks.com, you can see links to buy at my local indie Once Upon a Time. They're awesome. It's run by a mother and a daughter. This bookstore was failing, and they bought it and they revived it, and it's a great place to buy books.
Great. Everyone, go out and read. All right.
Thanks so much, Molly.
Thank you.